Welcome to Your Lifestyle is Your Medicine with me, Ed Paget. In this episode, we get to talk to Mike Dorian, good friend of mine and the founder of Living Soil Solutions. He's the guy who goes into the soil, helps repair all the things that modern agriculture has broken to make better soil and better vegetables, which ultimately lead to more nutrients for us. As always, this episode is brought to you by Regenerative for Expats, one of the only insurance companies that I know that gives you unlimited benefits for counseling, for fitness, and for nutrition. And they specialize in helping people like me who are expats from their own country and need health insurance when they live abroad. So check out Regenerative for Expats if that's something that you're interested in and you need. Mike Dorian, so happy that you're on this podcast. Lifestyle is Your Medicine, because what we're going to talk today about is probably going to blow some people's minds, because the more I learn about what you do, the more I'm just like, oh my God, I never, ever thought about it. So let's just dive straight in. Mike, tell me, how did you get into the world of the soil and the vermiculture and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ed. Thanks for having me. And it all kind of started when I first had a chance to live at a place and have a garden. So I was told to take a course with the Calgary Horticultural Club here in Calgary because we have Chinooks and stuff, and you need to learn how to grow in a Chinook area.
So what's a Chinook?
So Chinook is when we get warm movements of air coming over the mountains. And so it'll be in the middle of winter and we'll get these warm winds that'll come over and you'll get kind of like spring weather kind of coming in. So we get a lot of like weird freezing and thawing happening in the ground. So just a little bit of a different kind of weather pattern to deal with. So with that, I ended up having a conversation with a lady there and she turned me on to permaculture. And so I checked out this local site in town. Verge Permaculture at the time, and it was exactly what I was looking for at that moment. And I was in a position to sign up for their next course. So I went out to Nelson, BC and spent 2 weeks out there and did my Permaculture Design certificate. And then that kind of led me on to a couple of other courses throughout the summer and finished in the fall with this soil course, this guy named Doug Weatherby. He was coined the soil doctor at the time. And the guy just blew my brain apart. And it connected all the dots and it was all to the soil. And that's kind of when I came up with the business right in that course and the tagline, it all starts in the soil.
It all starts in the soil. So that's your business tagline. So how long ago was this then?
That was, so 2011 was when I did my PDC and then I started the business in 2012.
Wow, so you've been going for 10 years working with the soil. So tell me about it. Why do we, as people listening to this podcast, need to know about what you do?
Well, if you think about it, Ed, what are the 4 basic things that we need to survive as a species, right? We need water, we need food, we need oxygen, and we need shelter. So where do all those things come from? Well, oxygen, a lot of it comes from our tree base and our plant base, which grows in the soil. Our food comes from the soil. A lot of our homes are made from either the soil or wood that comes again from the soil. And and then the water. A lot of our water, when it is actually allowed to percolate and run through the soil actually cleans it, right? That's a big part of its process. So we're intimately tied to this stuff. But just because we walk on it all day long, we don't seem to give it the respect that it deserves. So I've always said that soil doesn't like to be treated like dirt. And because it's kind of out of sight, out of mind, we don't get a chance to give it that respect unless we're actually intimately working with it and growing in it.
Yeah, and I guess most people don't really have that connection. You're in the suburbs or in the city, you don't get your hands in the soil very much. So there's that disconnect. But why is that important to, let's say, me, I guess, when I was living back in Canada, I would go to the supermarket, buy my food, so what?
Yeah, so if we look at so the food that we're buying in a supermarket, so depending on what time of year, so when you were back here in Calgary, because we're in a climate that we're in the winter for 6-7 months of the year, well, we have a small window that you can grow that food. So we're now importing food from other places. So how far is it coming from is one thing. So by the time it's picked and we actually put it in our GOP, like how much nutrients is going to be actually available in that thing. And then you start looking at the whole basis of just, you know, the conventional farming systems. Like there's a lot of chemicals and stuff that are used to do these things on large scale, but to then also make sure that they do last that long on these long transport trips, so that they're not spoiling, you know, in transit. And if we start looking at the basis of the actual nutrients available for us compared to local food, well, we're going to be blown away on how much. No wonder people are popping multivitamins and nutrients and stuff all the time, because we're not getting it from our actual food.
Right. So the food looks good nowadays. And I've heard this argument before. It looks good because they figured out how to grow it to look healthy. They figured out how to transport it. But when you analyze the food, it doesn't have the right or the same amount of nutrients and vitamins and minerals and stuff as it used to have. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. And if you, there's lots of research that's been done that showcases like where a lot of our food used to sit at nutrient levels about 40, 30, 40 years ago. And a lot of it is down 30, 40, sometimes 50%. And if you look at the main nutrients that most farmers or most growers are using in a conventional method, is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Well, you're not going to get that much other basic nutrients with just using those three. So if we actually focus, instead of feeding the plant like we have been, and actually feeding the soil and letting the soil take care of the plants like it does in a forest or a native prairie where nobody fertilizes those systems and they look beautiful and they take care of themselves, how can we mimic some of that stuff in those systems in our backyards or in our back 40s?
So you said something there, which is amazing. So you feed the soil, not the plant. Whereas conventional farming would just put the fertilizers on the soil, which then feed the plant, but they don't do anything to the soil. Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah, because the nutrients that they're putting down is in a form that's water soluble. So as a plant takes the water up into its root system, kind of like a straw, then those nutrients can get pulled into that and pulled up. But in reality, if you see how a plant actually really gets its nutrients, it actually has a symbiotic relationship with a lot of the microorganisms within the soil. So the bacteria and the fungi, and they're helping decompose a lot of the matter, or they're mining the sand, silt, and clay and making these nutrients that are locked up available, and now playing kind of a lunchtime tradesies with the roots. So they're going, hey, give me some sugar, I'll give you some calcium. Give me some sugar, I'll give you some manganese, right? So now you're getting a lot more wider variety of nutrient availability instead of just those soluble nutrients where you're focused just on the plant.
So the fertilizers kind of shortcut like a bit of that process, right? They go straight into the water, they straight into the plant, make the plant look good. But really there is this symbiotic relationship that should be happening in the soil.
Yeah, 100%.
And what do you do? Tell me about that. Tell me what you do and the things that you may produce to help that relationship in the soil.
Yeah, so we look at kind of first the management of how that piece of property is being managed. So, have you been doing things traditionally? What have you been trying? It's not working. What are you trying to grow? What's going on with the history of your soil? And then we'll look at, okay, when we grow something out of the soil, so when you're taking something away, so all that energy goes up into say like a tomato, and then we take that tomato to eat it. Well, now we got to put some energy back. And that's where nature is really good at doing that, right? They're constantly recycling things and putting things back into the system. But we're really good at taking things and not doing that. How can we give back? So, now can we produce some kind of a compost or some kind of a soil amendment that we can put back into that soil? So looking at different waste streams, we have, if we're just looking at a backyard, do we have leaves that have fallen from the tree? Do we have cut grass from our neighbor? We have some waste of some food that we haven't finished or scraps that we can't eat. Is there a local coffee shop down the road that we can get some coffee grounds from? And then maybe we can make this compost pile, use these ingredients to make and breed microbes within it and then have them decompose and break those feedstocks down, and then put that back into the garden. So we're looking at doing that kind of thing. And then we can start to actually keep track of where these microbes are going within the soil. So if we can get a high diversity of organisms in there, then they're going to have a higher chance to work with the plant that we're going to be planting, and making sure that it's keeping it healthy, but also keeping pathogens and pests away. But then also that diversity is going to keep more of a resilient system. So as the weather starts to change, or if we get a weird storm, or if the pH somehow weirdly changes in the soil, then we've got organisms in there that can be resilient to still work and keep those plants healthy, instead of the whole system just going in shock mode and shutting down.
Right. And I've heard as well that in conventional farming, the monocropping idea makes them vulnerable to that, which is why they put on the herbicides and the pesticides. Like, does the way you're doing it need that sort of to manage the bugs as well, like that as well, or not?
Yeah, so that's something that we'll look at the management side. So if you were looking at the management side before and you were just growing one crop, well, as you said, yeah, they're going to be a lot more susceptible to disease and pathogens, because if you look anywhere in nature, not one species grows by itself. There's always multiple species. Plants like to grow in little guilds and grow in groups together. Like, I'm sure where you are now, if you walk through the forest or in the jungle there, like, it's multiples and multiples of different kinds of plants, and they're all growing at different levels. And if we looked underground, their roots would be growing in different depths and levels and bunches and stuff like that as well. So you're starting to see this mainstream thing called cover crops. So say a farmer typically grows barley because he's got a contract with some brewery in town. So he's growing some really high-end barley to make sure that they can make some really good beer. Well, that's his cash crop. But maybe we can do seeding underneath of some vetches or clovers or some other multiple low-growing plants, so that now you have about 5 or 6 different plants growing. So you have that good diversity. Some of them might be helping fix nitrogen and some other nutrients for that cash crop to grow. But then when you come to harvest it, they're not getting in the way of that harvest. So you can still get your cash crop, and now you're mulching some of that other stuff back into the soil, and you're increasing the biomass below and above ground to give it tons of organic matter to start to feed that life and build the structure of the soil.
Wow, you just blew my mind. So it's like you would grow a crop that you can harvest, plus grow another something underneath it at a lower height that helps replenish the soil. So then you don't need to put in as much fertilizer.
Exactly. So instead of taking your mindset of like, oh, I have to apply fertilizer to get this one plant to grow, why can't we grow a plant or a couple different plants to actually help that plant grow?
Is that
because now?
Sorry.
Yeah, so you're getting so many more benefits from that, right? Instead of where one, you're just applying this liquid that's going to help that plant do its thing, and then most of it's going to leach through the system. So you're kind of pissing your money away essentially to a certain degree. Or the other one is you're building the system and just making things better and better. It's kind of a no-brainer, really.
It is a no-brainer, and because we hear about this thing called runoff, right, where the rains wash off all the fertilizers into the water systems, and they cause overgrowth of algae and all that kind of stuff. So this sounds like a solution to that. So are people using this?
Yeah. There's it's becoming more and more popular. So you're going to start to hear this buzz of regenerative agriculture is kind of where it's starting to fall under.
What does that mean?
So regenerative agriculture kind of goes on the principles of 5 kind of things. So this goes looking at that forest example that I was talking about before, where nobody fertilizes a forest. So what's going on there that we can replicate in our back 40 or our backyard? The one is there's very little disturbance. We don't want to disturb the soil as often as some agricultural companies do. So like the tilling and that kind of stuff.
Right.
How can we minimize that? Right? Because some of the microbes in the soil are very fragile, so they get beat up really fast. The other one is always trying to make sure that we have the soil covered. Soil doesn't like to be bare. Then it's exposed to the wind, to the sun. Even raindrops falling on bare soil can break up and bust up that structure. We want to have it covered and and protected, whether that's residue or plants. The other one is try to have plants growing in it as often as possible. This talk about keeping a field fallow, well, it's actually going to be more productive for that field if we actually have some kind of plants growing in it, because now they're feeding those organisms within the soil and keeping that system running. It's like constantly keeping that bank account topped up, right? And then the other one, again, is that diversity thing that we talked about. So instead of growing one crop, how can we grow multiple crops, or have alleys of different species, or getting perennials, having the windbreaks on the edges, to make sure that we're just building up that diversity. And then where available is having some kind of animal integration. So, if we look up here in Alberta, how we used to have the bison roam through the prairies, well, if we can take cows or some other kind of rudiment like that and pass them through the land very quickly without overgrazing, then they're going to be helping process and speed up that succession of that land. And if you can't do that, then composting or some kind of other way of adding those amendments and residues back to the soil. So there's really simple ways to do that. And it's just the biggest misconnect that's happening right now is you go and talk to Joe Farmer, whose dad and then whose granddad has been doing this same thing for so many years, and tell them like, hey, well, you've been doing the best that you can, but these are the ways to take your farming operation to a different level. That's going to be very hard for them to make those changes, because change is hard, right? Especially when that's been your whole life for forever and a day. So it's
exactly.
Yeah, well, so you're starting to see it come, and it's just having those gentle conversations with farmers and not wagging the finger and going, hey, you've been doing this and that's bad and you shouldn't be doing it. Like, it's just, we were working with what we had and with the knowledge that we had, and now how can we do things better and make things more positive for everybody, especially all these little ones that we're going to be passing the land to, and our children.
Well, talking to children, I was reading somewhere about these farmers who are beginning to adopt this regenerative agriculture stance. And they're also beginning to learn that the high rate of cancers in the farming community, the high rate of leukemias in their children, could be coming from the chemicals that they used and their parents used. Which that is, to me, is like, imagine that you're a third generation farmer and you're like, well, hang on, you're telling me that my kid's sick because of something my father did and I did? Oh dear. That's
it's scary. Like just looking at the number one use of the herbicide Roundup or glyphosate.
Right.
And when it was first registered, it was registered as an antibiotic. So when they started doing their trials and showcasing, oh look, it doesn't hit human cells. Well, we're not just human. We're a very small percentage of human. We're a working ecosystem. So for every one human cell, there's about 10 microbes that work with it. So those microbes are the ones that are getting the hard hit. And that's what majority of we are. And that's where all these autoimmune diseases and all these kinds of things are coming from, because we're getting a buildup of this stuff. Like, it was 2 years ago, like, I eat fairly clean. I dabble on the odd, A&W burger or something like that here and there, because I think the body needs to know how to still work with some of these things. But I did a P test for glyphosate and I had a pretty decent level within me. So imagine somebody
for that. I didn't know
that's right.
I didn't know there was a test.
Yeah, there's I can send you if you want to have it in the show notes or whatever, a couple links and stuff for some guys that are down in the States. And I think there's one that might be starting in Canada too, where you can send in a urine test and they'll give you a report back on what the levels are in your body. So that right there is like, what a slap to the face. The stuff's everywhere.
It is everywhere. And I do remember reading about that. Glyphosate is not dangerous to humans, but that's not the point. It's dangerous to the microbiome. Yeah. And I wonder, and this is just my personal theory, so if anyone's listening to this, take this, as my opinion. I wonder whether this big sort of movement to go gluten-free is not necessarily the gluten, although there's research to back that up, but it's the Roundup, the glycinate in the gluten, or in those products that's causing the damage to the guts. I don't know, but that's what I feel.
Yeah. I think it's probably like a combination of something like that, and then just the fact that the wheat has been so modified over the years, right?
Right.
Like, there's a gentleman just not too far from here that grows one of the heritage wheats, red Fife, and like this wheat
Yes.
grows like 6 feet tall. But now you're lucky if it grows past your knee, right? So,
The dwarf wheat. I actually once met that guy, and he told me that every time, because it's so tall, the combines can't harvest it, and so it counts as a failed crop every year because it doesn't get the right yield or something. And he's like, it's not failed. That's just the way that wheat is, but it's not.
yeah,
It's not. Doesn't fit the guidelines for the dwarf wheat, which is the standard wheats.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Fascinating.
pretty funny.
All right, so I just want to bring this back. So we've got this idea of multiple crops. We've got this idea of covering the soil and not using these chemicals. So back in Canada, there I was in a picture. I lived in a picture perfect neighborhood where you'd rake the leaves off the lawn, pull out all the dandelions, and put the fertilizer on your soil and keep the beds pretty much bare, apart from the one or two perennials that you wanted to showcase. Is that the wrong approach?
Yeah, that sounds like a heck of a lot of work.
It
And like,
does. Right.
why are we doing all that? In the end, it's just we're doing it just to make sure that our neighbors are happy, essentially, right? Like it became this thing where we're so concerned about aesthetics of a property, of what we think that it should look like, based on rules that was made actually back in Britain, with the old gardening crews back in the day, because it was it was a thing where, oh, I don't grow my own food, so I'm well off enough that I can purchase it myself, so I will grow grass to show that I'm
Yes.
wealthy.
I
And it
remember that.
became this thing that just kind of stuck.
It
It's
was
so
something, it was a
bizarre
sign
to
of
me.
wealth, wasn't it, to have
Yeah.
a lawn. And then suddenly the middle class wanted to have lawns. And then now we're slaves to this monocrop lawn that you can't have a dandelion. I remember one year, I don't care less about the dandelions. And I remember, I think it was you or one of your colleagues was telling me about how they actually nitrogen fixers and they break up the soil and they're good for the lawn in the long run. So I left.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, so they're not a nitrogen fixer.
Oh,
So that's the legumes. So that's like clover and peas and that kind of thing. But what they're doing is, so they're a taproot. So that taproot will go down and pull nutrients up from the subsoils, like calcium is a big one that they do. But then that taproot also helps break up that compacted soil. So a little bit of that. And then as they're popping up and growing and dying, they're starting to create a little bit of diversity within that lawn that is typically only one species of grass as well.
yeah.
So, they've got multiple different functions. And then, you and me both know, by going into the local health food store, like dandelion root tea, or like even the greens, or even the flowers, these are expensive things that people are charging a lot of money for, that we're sitting there paying money to kill right in front of us. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, so my neighbor was retired and he was very, very house proud, and I was working full time. So I hadn't got time to do any of this. I would come back sometimes and my lawn would be mowed because it was, not was it bringing down the value of the street. And here's the other thing: when I didn't do anything about the dandelions, I had a ton of these companies come to the house and ring on the doorbell and say, "Hey, can we take the dandelions out?" Now, I lived in a cul-de-sac. These guys weren't driving by. These guys were called by someone in my neighborhood to come to my house to tell me that I was letting the side down by having the dandelions in the drive, sorry, on the grass. Anyway, I think
it's so weird. Like it's like it's ingrained in some people's brains that they're so angry. I've always wanted to make a little T-shirt, and it's a little dandelion, and it just says, "Hey, buddy, sorry for ruining your day." Like,
right.
just like,
It is interesting.
relax, take a breath.
So with that in mind, though, in suburbia, that's the mindset. We talked about the commercial farming. Now, you said that there is this regenerative agriculture movement. Is that getting out there into these bigger farms?
Yeah, 100%. There's examples of it all over the place. So just even with some of so there was just a movie put on Netflix a couple months back. Need to Grow was one of them. There's another one with Gabe Brown Joel Salatin's another big name. Nicole Masters with Integrity Soils. She's doing a bunch of stuff with ranches and whatnot and getting them moving. And so it's all these little pockets. So it's just making sure that we start connecting the dots. I actually just got pulled onto a lab group here in Alberta. So it's called the Regenerative Ag Lab. And they've got about 30 of us from different industries. So producers to research to educators, teachers, some people in government. And we're doing what we can to make sure that this kind of stuff can get pushed forward and not get bastardized and actually make it easy for farmers to make that transition.
And what are you doing in that group?
So I'm bringing the biological portion of the soil to that, but then also, being a provider of soil amendments and doing some consulting for farmers and just landowners, or, I work with the Leaf Ninjas, so they do a bunch of naturalization projects. So I bring a little bit of different information to the game, and just seeing where we take soil and really crap conditions and how we can flip it around and make it productive and turn it into what we want to get it to.
And there's a thing called like compost tea, which you put on the soil. Is that something you're still doing, or? Yeah.
We started that right from the very beginning of Living Soil Solutions, and something we still continue today. So if for your listeners, what that is essentially we're taking a physical substrate of compost or worm castings, or a combination of those. And so we've had it tested. We know that it's microbially viable. So there's lots of diversity of microbes in there. And then we're putting it into a liquid solution, essentially ripping the microbes and the nutrients off the physical substrate and having them suspended in the liquid solution. So it's a lot easier to apply, especially on larger acreage, than it is to try to spread a bunch of compost or castings across the field. So it's a really easy way to just build up the diversity of the microbes.
Right. So if I understand it correctly, it's like taking probiotics for the soil rather than eating all the foods that help the microbiome.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So let's say someone has an acreage, they're growing a monocrop, and they've had it for a couple of generations. You come along with your team and you start giving them some advice, maybe put the compost tea on the soil and so on. How long till that soil changes?
So depending on environmental conditions, are we getting some good, moisture levels? What's the rain doing? How bad were they beating it up before? Like, were they using a lot of synthetics and herbicides, and are those tied up in the soil? But typically anywhere from kind of a 3 to 5 year period, we can get some pretty good turnaround. And if people were on the right track and they do have some good organic matter and some humus within the soil, we can turn things up really quickly just because they've got a good kind of starting base.
So you can take a field that's been perhaps potentially abused for 20, 30 years and turn it around in 1 to 5 years.
Yeah.
And then how, like me as a consumer, how does that affect me? Like, so if I wanted to buy something from a farmer's market and, someone's gone through this process and he's like, hey, look, we use regenerative agriculture, we're organic, blah, blah, blah. This food is going to have more nutrients. Like, is it? That's the first question. And then how does that help me, so to speak?
Yeah. So that's where I think the testing is going to be very important to start showcasing this, because exactly like you said, a farmer could say one thing and, you could either pull the wool over the consumer's eyes or just BS them up around the store, maybe be completely honest and it's just glazing them over. So how can we make it very simple and just show the data? Like, there's going to be some people that'll look somebody in the eye and go, okay, I believe you. But there's going to be other people that are going to want to see numbers.
Yeah.
And I'm a member with the Bionutrient Association down in the States. I have a device that they sent me that we're going to start putting into use this spring here, because I got it in the fall, so it was already too late for the season. But what it does is it actually tests the vegetable that you're growing and gives you real-time data of the nutrient complexity within it. So they figure within 4 or 5 years, we'll be able to take this phone and be able to go up to a piece of food at the farmer's market or a grocery store, scan it, and let us know what's actually in it. So then you can then go, okay, well, I will pay this $5 for this because I know I'm getting something out of it. Or I'm not buying this because it's got nothing in it for me.
That's amazing. Have you used this machine in the supermarket? Have you been testing it like of things or?
I haven't yet. That's what we just finished up building this greenhouse here, and that's my next project. But yeah, like I can't wait to go up to the Hutterites and like test some of their food and like, oh buddy, what are you doing? There's nothing in this. Because the first round that they did down in the States, they sent it to a bunch of guys growing carrots. I think it was about 200 different farms. And the most nutrient dense carrot that came back was worth 200 carrots on the other spectrum.
Oh my God.
So that shows you how much discrepancy we have in our food system right now.
What, I don't understand why you haven't been down to Safeways and put it in everything. Would you stab it in the fruit or something, or stab it in the vegetables?
Yeah, you just take a cutting of it and you give it a squeeze and you get some of the liquid from it. So yeah.
That sounds amazing. Wow.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's gonna revolutionize like shopping in the future.
Oh, 100%.
Huh. Interesting. Wow. You just really blow my mind. That's cool. So, well, I forgot where I was. So, all right, we got the, yeah, we were regenerating the soil. We're now being soon going to be able to test whether or not the vendor is actually right in claiming that his way of farming is going to be better. And so, what do you see for the future then? Is this going to change things?
It has to, like, because if you just see what's going on right now with fertilizer prices and everything's tied to energy, because energy is that runs the economy. I don't care what you say, it's tied to everything. So right now, diesel fuel, they're talking about having shortages. The price of fertilizer has tripled and quadrupled in some places. So for a farmer, which, you know, a good chunk of them still work off farm just to pay their bills, they need every dollar in their pockets that they can keep. But if they're forking out more and more, like, they're not going to be able to do anything. So I think we're going to be forced to switch to something different here. And if a farmer can prove that he's doing his best to build that soil up and make it better, and then be able to get that quality produce out of the back end, well then, you know, we're not going to have to buy as much, because we're going to be getting much more nutrients for us. And we're now supporting them to keep building that soil, and it's helping with the whole environment. And looking at what's going on with like the carbon markets and even some of these crypto things, like our good friend Rob Avis has got some cool projects on the go right now, where they're going to be able to get people to invest into helping a farmer actually do that transition and change their operation from, you know, a conventional to more of a regenerative model. And so now you're going to be able to get people helping out and getting more involved in the food system and more intimately involved with their food that they're going to put into their gobs.
But does it make financial sense for the farmer to change? Like, are the profit margins the same or better? How does that work?
So most of the stuff that I've been looking at, it is definitely better. They might be spending a bit more money in the beginning.
Yeah.
But if you look at the future cost analysis of what you're going to be saving on future amendments, on water holding capacity and water infiltration rates, and then just even pest and management control, it's going to go through the roof. And then looking at how that disparity of, you know, if you're working in the commodity markets compared to growing vegetables that might be considered organic or local, well, you can actually charge a little bit more of a premium for that too, because, you know, it's traveling less time. There's more of an intimate relationship with the end consumer, and you might be able to skip some of the food or
supplements,
food selling companies, and just direct sales to the consumer.
Right. Interesting. There's a show I watched when I was back in England. I think it's on Netflix. It's called Clarkson. No, it's on Prime. Clarkson's Farm. Did you watch that one?
Yeah.
Whatever people think of Clarkson, but if you haven't watched it, it's an amazing. He's got a 1,000-acre farm, and he tries to farm it himself, and he writes down all the prices and so on. Yes, he was starting from scratch, as in he bought his own equipment. But at the end of a year, on 1,000 acres, he made, what was it, like $700 or something? I can't remember. It was under $1,000. And then he's like, farming is hard, but he was doing it conventionally. He bought or the fertilizer. And then he had to have those special barns to have the fertilizer because he couldn't have the two fertilizers in the same room and all this kind of stuff. It was a fascinating watch, but it was interesting. It'd be interesting to see someone like that with 1,000 acres turn into this regenerative agriculture model.
Totally. Yeah. And I guarantee you there's probably people in the process of filming this kind of stuff right now.
Right.
Like with that Little Big Farm, what those guys did on Netflix. Have you seen that film?
No, I haven't seen that one, no.
So they did kind of a permaculture regenerative model, and it took them from like a completely depleted one. I think it was about 6 to 7 years, and they completely turned around. But from having problems with pests and then ground squirrels, and then all of a sudden they set up bird houses, and they started having owls and stuff moving in to get those, and then they were doing chickens and lambs and stuff too. It's a pretty neat little watch.
That's cool. And that's the permaculture model, isn't it? It's like mimicking those systems of nature.
Yeah, because nature's figured this stuff out. Like nature doesn't run on surplus. Nature runs on just keeping things maintained and always kind of giving back. It's this give and take all the time. And I don't know why we think we're smarter than nature sometimes, because we are actually part of nature. So let's just stay integrated with it instead of trying to always manhandle it and steer it a certain way, because every time we do that, we just get beat down.
Yeah, interesting. Well, Mike, I wanted to ask this as we're kind of coming to a close. Where can people find out more about what you do and this whole movement?
Yeah, so we've got our website is livingsoil.ca. We're also on Instagram and YouTube at Living Soil Solutions. And then we've got our little urban farm here called Highfield Farm, and that's at highfieldfarm.ca. Cool.
Great. All right. Well, we'll put all that stuff in the show notes. And hopefully this has opened some people's eyes to this world. I didn't even know about most of this stuff, and I've known you for a while, that there is this whole way that we can change the way agriculture is done and ultimately be healthier for ourselves, but also have healthier soil as well.
100%. I think I heard you say your mind was blown 3 times, so you might not have a whole lot of mind left right now.
I didn't have much mind to start with. All right. Thanks, Mike.
No problem, Zed. Take care. What
a fascinating topic, the topic of the soil. Man, I can't wait till that app comes out that I can scan my food to see how nutritious it really is or how nutritious it really isn't. That's going to be really cool when that comes out. In fact, that's going to be a game changer. Hey, look, if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe, just so I know how you feel about these podcasts. If you like them, just let me know. Also, if you're listening to this as a podcast, you're listening to this, so however you download your podcasts, make sure you subscribe so you can catch the next one. Remember, your lifestyle is your medicine.